Let's just start with a number. 2.5 million. Just try to picture that. That's how many men the Soviet Union pulled together for one last gigantic push. Okay, now add to that mountain of men over 6,000 tanks.
And to round it all out, throw in nearly 42,000 artillery pieces and rocket launchers. I mean, what you're looking at here is a concentration of military power that is just almost impossible to wrap your head around. And all of it was pointed at one single city.
Yep, that city was Berlin. And in this explainer, we are breaking down the final, absolutely apocalyptic battle of the war in Europe.
So let's set the scene. It's the spring of 1945, and the Third Reich is literally being squeezed into oblivion. You've got the Western Allies pushing in from the West, the Soviets storming in from the East, and right there, in the middle of it all, Berlin. It was the final prize. But this wasn't just about lines on a map or military strategy. It was deeply psychological, intensely personal. For Stalin, taking Berlin, that was everything, the ultimate symbol of victory. It meant unbelievable prestige, and of course, a geopolitical lock on Central Europe. Now for Hitler, trapped in his bunker, it was the complete opposite. It was this last, totally delusional hope that his armies could somehow perform a miracle and smash the Red Army right there at the city gates.
So, let's talk about the actual forces lining up for this thing. What did this high-stakes matchup really look like? Well, to say it was an unbalanced fight, that is putting it very, very mildly.
Believe it or not, German intelligence actually had a pretty good idea of what they were up against on the Oder River, which was basically their last major line of defense. They calculated the Soviets had an 11-to-1 advantage in infantry, 7-to-1 in tanks, and an absolutely insane 20-to-1 advantage in artillery. And Hitler's response when he saw these numbers? He literally dismissed them as rubbish. And what about the guys in charge? Well, on the Soviet side, everything was driven by one man, Joseph Stalin. He was ruthless, deeply manipulative, and he actively encouraged this bitter rivalry between his top generals, Zhukov and Konev. He basically turned the drive on Berlin into a personal race, and he couldn't have cared less that this little competition would cost countless Russian lives.
Now you flip over to the German side, and the picture couldn't be more different. Their leadership was essentially paralyzed by an increasingly paranoid Hitler who was totally disconnected from reality. From his bunker, he just kept issuing these no-withdrawal orders, which only made an already catastrophic situation 1,000,000 times worse for his soldiers.
Okay, so the stage is set. With all that in place, the race to Berlin began, and it kicked off with one of the most successful and terrifyingly fast military operations in history.
On January 12, 1945, the Red Army unleashes its huge Vistula-Oder offensive, and the speed is just breathtaking. Warsaw falls in just 5 days. By the end of that same month, the lead tanks of Marshal Zhukov's army group had reached the Oder River. That's only 40 miles from Berlin. They had chewed up hundreds of miles in a matter of weeks, shattering entire German armies along the way.
So you might be wondering, what on earth was the German high command doing while this tidal wave was rolling towards them? Well, Hitler was obsessed with other fronts. He flat out refused to send reinforcements, famously saying, "The Eastern Front must take care of itself." That decision right there effectively sealed its fate.
But before the Red Army could actually get to Berlin, they had to cross one last bloody obstacle, the heavily fortified Seelow Heights. It took 3 days of non-stop, brutal frontal assaults to finally break through. The cost? 30,000 Russian soldiers killed.
So, once they were past those heights, the entire battle transformed. It went from being this grand offensive across open country to brutal, claustrophobic, ugly street-by-street fighting right in the heart of the Reich.
The Red Army was ready for this, though. They drew on all that hard-won, brutal experience from Stalingrad. They used these specialized assault groups. Think of them like a combined wrecking crew. Infantry, tanks, engineers, and flamethrowers all packed into one unit. And instead of fighting their way down deadly streets, they just bypassed them by blasting holes through the walls of buildings, clearing each structure room by room, cellar by cellar. And they fought around the clock, just to give the defenders absolutely no rest. The defense of the city itself was just a grim, desperate affair. It was fought by what was left of the regular army, old men from the Volkssturm Home Guard, and even Hitler Youth kids armed with single-shot anti-tank weapons. But the most fanatical fighters of all were the foreign SS units. These were men from all over Europe who had joined the Nazi cause, And with their home countries already liberated, they knew surrender wasn't an option. For them, there was really no choice but to fight and die.
The symbolic climax of this whole bloody battle came on April 30th, 1945. After a ferocious 10-hour fight to clear the Reichstag building floor by floor, Soviet soldiers finally raised the red banner right over the top. And just hours earlier, less than a quarter mile away, Adolf Hitler had committed suicide in his bunker.
But the fall of the Reichstag, that really wasn't the end of the story. The cost of this victory was immense, and what came after ushered in an entirely new era for the world.
305,000. That was the number of Red Army casualties, killed and wounded, in just this final assault. It was the single costliest battle of the entire war for the Soviets.
And the cost for the city itself, for the civilians caught in this hell, was just as horrific. An estimated 125,000 people perished in those final apocalyptic days.
And here's the real kicker. Ultimately, the fall of the Third Reich didn't bring lasting peace. By putting the Red Army deep in the heart of Europe, the victory in Berlin just drew the new battle lines for the next global conflict, the Cold War.
So we're left with this question. The fires that consumed Berlin in 1945 absolutely marked the end of one of history's most destructive regimes. But was it really an end? Or was it actually the crucible that forged the beginning of a whole new conflict that would define the next half-century?